One second. All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is David Nichols. I'm a facilitator for IFRP and the BFC. And I want to welcome you today to our presentation and webinar on collaborative forest groups, thinking about strategic planning and how we leverage resources.
I'm just going to be done with it.
We have there we go. We have a discussion today that we're going to listen in on some folks who are going to share their perspective and their expertise. I'll introduce them in just a second. And then we want to hear from you. And so we want to definitely create kind of an interactive atmosphere here in this webinar. So the second half of that, we're going to get to hear some of the things that you're working on or ways that we might be able to collaborate and work together. I want to do some introductions. Before that, let me just take care of some housekeeping. I've kind of asked everybody to go ahead and introduce yourself via chat. So go ahead and share again your name, your role, and where you're from. That would be fantastic. Just so you know, we're recording this webinar so that folks who maybe weren't able to make it today could see that. We'll be able to push that out later on to be able to see a link. So if it's so fantastic that you want to come back for a second time, we'll make sure you have the opportunity to do that. Also, I want to launch a poll just to get a sense for some of your thoughts with regard to strategic planning. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that out there. You should see that poll now. And go ahead and take just a second. It's a multiple option sort of poll, so you could click more than one answer if you'd like, if you think about that. We'll check in on that in just a little bit. So let me introduce our speakers today. We've got a really fantastic group of folks who are going to join us. So we have Jamie Baxter, who's a Collaborative Capacity Program Manager at the National Forest Foundation. She's based out of Bellingham, Washington, and joined NFF in October of 2023 to design and lead collaborative capacity programs for forests and communities. She's worked in collaboration, strategic planning, capacity building, and cross-boundary stewardship efforts for over 15 years. Tawny Robertson is a professional facilitator, mediator, and collaboration practitioner. For the past 25 years in the US and internationally, her project work has included forest planning and management, large landscape conservation, outdoor recreation planning, urban planning and watershed collaboratives, collaborative adaptive management, community visioning, and youth engagement. She specializes in designing and supporting place-based collaboratives and peer-to-peer networks. Maisie Powell began her work with the NFF as a Conservation Connect Fellow in 2019. She's now the Northern Rockies Program Coordinator based out of Missoula, Montana, and is excited to work to support collaborative conservation efforts in the Rocky Mountain West. And finally, John Reiling works for the USDA Forest Service as a project manager for the Southwest Idaho Wildfire Crisis Landscape. John has spent the last 20 years with the agency in various timber, silviculture, and leadership positions, primarily on the forests in Idaho and Arizona. John lives in Boise, Idaho with his wife and 2 kids, where they enjoy all forms of recreation. So please kind of welcome all those folks in. We've got that's a great group of people who are going to share with us today. And Maisie, are you the one who's going to Jamie, are you the one who's going to take us from here?
Yes, I am happy to do that. Greetings, everyone. It's great to see such a wonderful response to this webinar. Really great to have you all here today. I am here to open us up, but Tawny and I will actually be tag teaming kind of the framing of this discussion before we turn it over to Maisie and John to give you some place-based, more Idaho-specific highlights from their work, and I'm excited to share that the space with them today as well. So really, why strategic planning now? We launched this poll, and I'm going to go ahead and can you see that okay? Can you see the poll? Are you able to get that? Okay, great. It's really interesting to see this spread. We didn't have we didn't expect specific responses. There was no right answer to this question. It's really interesting to see the variety that you all feel the benefits are of strategic planning. And I couldn't agree more. I think that strategic planning is such a valuable process for so many different reasons. And kind of the intent of us setting up this webinar really stemmed from a few different things. One being Dr. Chelsea Pennick's work leading a survey late last year. And Chelsea, I see that you're on the call, so hello. Really asking collaborative groups about what their current needs were, what some of the things they were thinking about. And we're seeing here in this breakdown of what best practices, what things people were really thinking about in the collaborative practitioner space. What resources were they really looking for? And the thing that came up the most, the highest percentage of folks really responded that they were very interested in learning more about strategic planning. So very excited to provide a little bit of an overview today, but really see this as part one of the conversation. Really see effective strategic planning leading to nimbleness and adaptation to changing conditions. We know that we are in unique times right now. We, being the National Forest Foundation, have been able to offer through Forest Service regional funds, small grants to collaborative groups in the last year. We are really grateful to be able to do that, and we want to make sure that people are able to use those funds and be able to leverage them for years to come, and not just have this kind of one and done opportunity. So really using strategic planning as an opportunity to think about thoughtful resource allocation to help build a strategic plan or resources that might lead to new funding opportunities, and really establish those benchmarks for accountability and for kind of your long-term goals and planning. So very excited to be able to be here today to talk through that. Thinking through what is strategic planning and some of the activities that go into that. Really, the intent at the very beginning is to develop a process. Like, how do you actually want to go about designing a plan? What kind of questions do you need to ask yourselves? One could be who's involved, who isn't currently involved. Maybe we should do an assessment of who's not at the table right now. Also thinking about how, what kind of goals you all have. What's the goal of the landscape? What sort of resource needs exist there? Are you seeing in several areas increased wildfire? How do we address that through our collaboration? How do we support the Forest Service in our work? How do we support other landowners in this work? And again, asking that question of who needs to be involved to answer those questions. Also recognizing that strategic planning really can help strengthen relationships and the understanding of shared priorities. Really with the intent of developing a list of goals and potentially a written plan, not always the case, but oftentimes people do document their decisions. What we're seeing, especially for collaborative forest groups, having a short plan is better than having a long plan. We want to have a plan that's active. It doesn't have to be onerous. It doesn't have to be something that you create and then put on a shelf. It's really important to keep it alive. And so really thinking about how you maintain and review a living plan. Some other things to consider is ways that you can maybe bring in a facilitator, even if it's just for key meetings. We know that there are many of you who are resource limited, so wanting to think about ways that you can actually bring in folks at like key moments, and really consider what those capacity needs may be. So do you need funding? Do you need staff? Do you potentially need fiscal sponsorship? There are a lot of questions that strategic planning can really open the doors to, and it can be helpful to really bring in someone who maybe has done this before to support you in that journey. We also feel like it's really important to celebrate at every stage. It's really, this work is really hard. It can be really hard, but it can be really meaningful. And so when you hit certain milestones, it's important to recognize those. And at this time, I think I also welcome Tani to share any lessons learned or things that you consider about strategic planning. Tani, before I turn it over to you fully for kind of thinking about leveraging resources.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. I would say a few other items related to strategic planning. One is, it can happen at your organization, individual organization level, the collaborative level, and the network of collaboratives level. And it kind of has to happen at all three of those, but then you can identify areas of common challenge that you can work better together on. You could go in for collaborative grants, share resources, other things. So just thinking through at the different scales. Also that it can be small and more frequent. It doesn't have to be a big process, creating a big document. I mean, ideally, periodically you do that. And we oftentimes do mid-process evaluation, check in with everybody. How do we need to, stay relevant to everyone, and especially as new people come in. So, and then the last thing, just the role of the facilitator, being a professional facilitator, that a lot of times people think of us as we're the meeting manager and we can come in and make sure you have a productive meeting, but really 90% of our work is more on the design side and the between meetings, and just facilitators with experience with strategic planning can help design the process so that you even have a roadmap for how to go about doing what Jamie's just outlined.
Yeah, thanks, Bunny. One thing to note too, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat. I know we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, but also we'll be monitoring that. So kind of moving on to shared funding opportunities, realize that with strategic planning, you're also thinking about how do we actually make this work happen? That's a critical part of this. I'm going to welcome Tani to talk about some shared funding models, but I also wanted to just acknowledge and happy to share these resources after the call. There are several grant opportunities that do support this type of work. One is the NFF's Collaborative Capacity Program that we've provided through the Idaho program, but also on our national scale. And then I've listed a few here. So the AIM grant with COCO, the SFI's Community Conservation Grant, and then the Catalyst Fund with the Network for Landscape Conservation. Again, happy to share these resources, but just want to acknowledge that there are some opportunities for funding in the future.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to just talk briefly about shared funding and one version of shared funding. I'm sure there's others. We use shared funding for all the collaboratives we support. I think every single one is using shared funding. So this would be where each core partner, not all partners necessarily, are cost sharing, the costs of keeping the collaborative moving forward, facilitation and other related kinds of functions, not all the much more expensive on the ground, project implementation kind of costs. People use formulas to figure that out, or just how much they can afford. That's the reality. And I was thinking of 6 of the collaboratives we support. One of them we actually managed to convince somebody to be a fiscal sponsor, and the other 5, we just directly invoice the different entities. But we have, say, in the example I'm going to give in a second, agreement documents like MOU kind of documents between, say, the fiscal sponsor and the collaborative, and the fiscal sponsor and the facilitation support group or backbone organization, whoever it is, to really outline the roles and responsibilities and how it all works. And I'll also say that oftentimes, in our case, almost always, it's been the Forest Service has fully funded the initial work until it becomes like, this is a really great collaborative, the proof of concept. And then we shift towards shared funding. Next slide. So one example, in Central Arizona, the Verde Front Collaborative, Verde Valley, it's between Phoenix and Flagstaff for anybody who's traveled far from Idaho to here in Arizona. And this one it's been working with shared funding for over 10 years. In this case, there's 11 core partners that are on our leadership council, and then many more that are involved in other ways. 5 municipalities, a county, state agency, 3 feds, a tribe. It's a mosaic, like all of these collaborative kind of footprints. And they each contribute $500 to $3,000 a year. It used to be, when $24.99 was a real micro purchase amount for some federal agencies, that was their top amount. And the fiscal sponsor would invoice them once a year. They would also do the tracking and the reporting of the spending that based on what we would tell them, and they had a 10% indirect cost. And then we function ongoing as the facilitation team. And it's worked really well. And we have a coordinating team of senior staff from those agencies that are the ones that take it back to their agency in their own budgets and make sure each year it stays a line item. Next slide and last slide. Yeah, what the benefits. So obviously cost sharing helps it be a lower cost per core partner. And they're all benefiting from it. if you're functioning well. The shared leadership and the shared ownership buy-in is literal and figurative. We've seen the partners become much more about they're part owner of that collaborative, and they really feel that commitment. It gets the whole thing much more institutionalized. By being in the regular budgets of all of these local government and agency key participants. The neutrality has been important for the backbone organization of facilitation team to be able to work for the collaborative and not for just one organization. And we're not just staff provided by one organization. And then finally, the diversified approach. You know, if one partner, say recently Forest Service, has had to, you know, stop funding their part, it doesn't bring it all down. It doesn't fall apart. And we here in Region 3 had 4 contracts terminated for convenience all in 1 week for the use of the terms facilitation and collaboration. And those were in collaboratives. 2 or 3 of the collaboratives stepped up, and the other partners said, we're going to add more, or we're going to start co-funding this because it's so important. So it really, you know, not only has it been helpful to just manage to keep things going, but they've come through. It's come through as an approach in times of crisis. And I want to just say, I'm happy to chat offline with anybody who has any further interest. I'm happy to share our agreement documents. Any assistance is, you know, happy to help.
I really urge people to take Tani up on that. She is a wealth of knowledge and plenty of resources to share. So for now, I think we are going to shift a little bit to thinking about specific examples in Idaho. I'm going to welcome Maisie first to talk about the Panhandle Forest Collaborative and their work with strategic planning. And then we will have time, a few minutes at least, for questions. I see a question in the chat, so we'll make sure to get to that after this. But for now, I will welcome Maisie up.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Maisie Powell again with National Forest Foundation, and I work as a facilitator for the Panhandle Forest Collaborative and work with a variety of other collaboratives across the state. And Jamie asked me to just share a couple key components or tips for considering strategic planning for collaborative groups. And did just want to start overall by sharing, I think, you know, strategic planning is just critically important in identifying that shared identity for the group, as well as a sense of purpose. In order to move anything forward, groups really have to have this. And so urge you all to engage in strategic planning if you haven't in a while, or if you just think that there's ways that the group could work together better. And I'll just also note that I think there's no one right way to do this as well. And lean on, you know, if you can't have a facilitator, which not all groups do, to lean into these processes, you also lean into the other collaborative members. A lot of folks have, you know, strategic planning experiences from the groups they work with. And so really just tap on the resources within your collaborative. But a couple of components that I wanted to share that are important and are aspects of the Panhandle Forest Collaborative strategic process that we are currently in the middle of. I wanted to start with this component around collecting data or an assessment. So say you're at the beginning of a collaborative group, I think it's really important to start to gather some data and see if collaboration is even possible or warranted. Is there that concept of the shared purpose and shared identity that the group could move forward? If you're in the middle of a process or doing kind of this mid-process check-in, I think it's really valuable too, just to gather some data, have the snapshot of where the group is right now, you know, identify things like what's going well, what are the challenges or barriers, revisit why people participate, a crucial component. And I also think that this can be valuable because it can take some of the uncomfortable conversation away and it turns into data, and it's a lot easier to bring up some of those stickier issues that people might not feel comfortable bringing to a group in a different kind of more dialogue-based setting initially. Something else that I think is really important is building consensus on kind of the level of engagement for the process overall. I think this is important both internally and externally. So one thing I know working with a lot of groups, not everyone is that interested in the nitty-gritty process pieces. And so finding ways to have conversations with the members, for example, and then having a group that's going to focus on workshopping or wordsmithing their documents or their mission statement or whatever it is. And then similarly, a lot of these groups, and this is the case for the PFC, there's a lot of other folks that attend the PFC meetings that are not the collaborative members. We have agency staff, we have tribal representatives, additional interested parties that just continue to show up to these meetings. And so having these consensus-based conversations with the group was really important about how and when and why are we going to include others' perspectives in this. And for PFC, it was really important to get that perspective from the broader group. And so we're planning for that meeting coming up in May. And then last, just wanted to say, once all said and done, I think it's really important to assemble a work plan and capitalize on this energy of finding that shared purpose and common goals. I think strategic plans can kind of light that or relight that fire under people as to why they're participating. And yeah, it's really important to then track what you're going to accomplish and give people those tasks and deadlines. I tend to find that people have more disposable energy than you might realize if it's something that they feel energized and passionate about. And so really leaning on the folks that are at the table and putting that strategic plan into some actionable items to end. And I did have one resource that I wanted to share just to wrap up. Again, I think assessments, ideally, if you have an external facilitator, that's great. Someone that can really come in and give that external perspective, but that's not always the case. And I'm dropping a link in the chat here. It's from a collaborative health-based group, community wellness, but really easy for a group to just run an assessment like this and collect data in a way that might not be as just resource intensive. So just wanted to share that as an end. Thanks all.
Thanks so much, Maisie. And yeah, again, if you have any questions for Maisie, we'll take those in just a moment. But we're going to go ahead and move on to John with the Southwest Idaho All Lands Partnership. So John, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm John Reiling. I'm the project manager for the Southwest Idaho Wildfire Crisis Landscape. I work for the Forest Service, but I'm zoned across.
John just freeze up on us.
Oh, did I freeze? Sorry, there's a lot of internet pull on in the office right now. Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll briefly cover the Southwest Idaho All Lands Partnership and our strategic planning efforts. So just a quick background on the partnership, which just initiated a couple years ago. We knew we had significant wildfire risk in Southwest Idaho, but when the Fireshed Registry, GTR 425, was published and Southwest Idaho was designated as one of the 10 initial landscapes for the wildfire crisis strategy, we had a combination of data, funding, social and political support to make a big cross-boundary difference. However, this landscape or the Fireshed complex, it spanned multiple collaborative groups, fire working groups, counties, forests, and other jurisdictional ownerships. These groups, they were all doing great work within their designated spaces, but we had a unique opportunity to add to these ongoing efforts to help align the pace and scale of treatments with the need, or in this case, forest resiliency and wildfire risk reduction. So we developed a meta collaborative, now known as the Southwest Idaho All Lands Partnership, with a focus on implementation and pooling expertise, resources, adding capacity and funding to cohesively support ongoing efforts across the landscape. It started with a small group from Idaho Department of Lands and their shared stewardship program, the Forest Service, National Forest Foundation, and Idaho Power. We knew we needed it to be implementation focused with a shared vision around ecologically minded wildfire risk reduction. To be successful at supporting private ownership treatments, we really needed those trusted community leaders at the table, as well as other implementing partners or organizations with jurisdictional responsibilities. The process of identifying, connecting, and aligning interested parties, that first bullet, it never really ends, but often you have to start with a coalition of the willing, and as you find success, it's easier to bring others into that fold. I know many of you and the collaboratives you take part in already have this stakeholder network and trust, but it's important not to lose sight of who might add value to the strategic planning process and who can help you achieve your shared objectives at the scale you're operating. We knew that this would be an evolving group. People representing different organizations will come and go. So we needed to establish and document a process to work together that could easily be replicated, adapted, and shared as people and conditions change. We accomplished this by developing governance documents in the form of operations manual, communication plan, implementation plan. We're still working on a conservation finance strategy / business plan, as well as risk-based planning and monitoring strategy. And again, as it was mentioned before, you don't have to get into the nitty gritty of all it. I mean, it comes down to how much capacity and time you have, but in order to help focus people's time and so that they could find value in their contributions and not just have meetings for the sake of meetings, we structured our All Lands partnership to have a steering committee and separate committees and task groups to address each of those different documents. I'll focus the limited remaining time I have around our risk-based strategy. So there are a lot of different tools or frameworks that can be used to establish a common operating picture and wildfire risk reduction and prioritization, many of which are free and relatively intuitive. Feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to discuss any of those different options in detail. Don't have time to get into that in this short amount of time, but for us, there was reluctance to simply adopt what the state or a federal agency or county or utility company was using. So we went with the Vibrant Planet platform. Using this single platform allowed us to leverage local expertise and spatial data in a way that fostered trust and buy-in while providing a common language for collaboration. I think regardless of the tool or framework that is used, for us, it was critical to co-develop strategies at scale in a way that allows you to seamlessly coordinate operations on the ground. To do that, you need to have a shared vision and trust, which can be developed through a strategic planning exercise. And lastly, we've learned the importance of having a strategy that is iterative and flexible. We're going through a lot of changes. The All Lands partnership has brought in an additional over $20 million that's in jeopardy of pullback. And then also that's been matched by all of our partners for in-kind contributions. And so that's leaving a pretty uncertain future. However, through the process our partners went through, establishing relationships, trust, and efficiencies, we've set ourselves up to be a good investment and to find continued success well into the future. Now, we don't always do a great job of championing our own successes, but that's something that we're working on. I think with that, we have time for questions.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Maisie, for sharing that.
It looks like the first question that popped up in there was for Tani, and it was a question around the financial structuring for coordination for the majority of your partnerships.
Yeah, so these collaboratives are informal. They operate with a collaborative charter for collaborative governance, as has been mentioned previously. So they don't get funding directly as a collaborative, and so the funding has either gone through a fiscal sponsor, like in the example I gave, is a friends group who everybody agreed to could be their fiscal sponsor, or it's been us as the facilitation organization invoicing each directly. And in the case of the fiscal sponsor, they invoice each entity annually, and we invoice the fiscal sponsor quarterly as facilitators. And then at their quarterly leadership meetings, they're reporting back what the budget is and how much has been used. The leadership council is agreeing on our scope of work and that kind of thing. I don't know if that answers your question.
Any follow-up on that or any additional questions that anyone would like to ask?
Thanks, Tani. That did answer my question.
I think I have one question for our three other panelists. You know, recognizing that the maybe not the majority, but several of the collaborative forest groups that we have across the state of Idaho maybe are volunteer run or operating under very low capacity. What advice do you have for at least just getting started? What is like the momentum builder for strategic planning that you all maybe have experience with or feel like could be really important?
I think I will just say this wasn't what motivated the PFC, but I think it has maybe added motivation just in the interim. It's just the amount of change going on. I think change is challenging, but it also provides an opportunity to just reflect and think about how to be nimble and adapt to those changes. So just that's something that I've seen motivating the PFC group is just what are we going to do moving forward if things change? Let's regroup. And so just kind of seizing the moment.
There's
And
another.
I'll
Oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to build on something that Maisie said earlier. You know, sometimes you'll find that people have more capacity than they realize when it's something that they're passionate and interested in. And for us, we were really hesitant to try to ask people for more time or for more meetings or to help develop a strategy, knowing that they're already at capacity. They might already be participating in multiple other working groups or collaboratives. But if you can tap into their expertise and it's something that they're passionate about and they can share, then usually that's something that can get momentum and you can find success.
John, the question that's came in through the chat kind of builds on that theme. So from John Robinson, it says, everyone seems so busy that it could be a tough sell to set aside extra time for strategic planning. How long does the strategic planning process take to really make a difference, and how often do you need to revisit the strategic plan? So any guidance there from our panel?
I can share what we're doing for the PFC. So yeah, it does take a lot of time, but I think it's worth it in the long run. And what we're doing to kind of just continue business as usual while simultaneously engaging in this process is just setting aside some time within meetings to do the strategic planning process, but also continuing things, you know, that we do on a regular basis. And so the goal is to, you know, where I might say, you know, an organization, nonprofit, they might do strategic planning in like a 2-day, you know, intensive session. We're not doing that at all. We're not asking people to spend that kind of time, but rather we're doing this over the course of like 6 months with the goal of having it a strategic plan for around 5 years and something that we can then review annually and look at those, you know, specific goals, revisit, et cetera. But yeah, I think again, there's no one size fits all and fit within the constraints of your group.
Yeah, I'll chime in as well. And I totally agree, Maisie. Yeah, no one size fits all. We will have, like we've canceled, say, the leadership council equivalent that meets quarterly. That quarter, we might have a more in-depth workshop. We actually had it in person because people live close enough together. And it really enabled us to also expand and involve more of the partners that don't necessarily come as regularly, because we were reaching out more broadly. So it new people got more engaged because it was highly interactive. And we also used multiple methods, such as, you know, short surveys about how, you know, the current vision, current mission, do these still resonate for you? And so then we could add just that component to a leadership council agenda. Here's what's your feedback on this specific piece. So you're making good use of different people's time.
All right. Well, speaking of making good use of time, I know we want to hear from a lot of you. One of the ways that we did that was asking for your responses in a poll, and I'm sharing those results right now. But what I want to do is pivot us into a conversation that we get to talk a little bit about some of your thoughts and what you have going on. Maisie, do we have one more slide for that? Or excuse me, Jamie, do we have one more slide for that? There it is. Yeah, so the discussion you'll have, and we'll have somebody in each of the rooms to kind of help us with this. But if you're one of those folks who says, "Oh, I want to really keep track of what all the things are we're supposed to talk about," take your picture right now. We'd love to have you share a little bit about what you're proud of accomplishing within your collaborative group. We'd love to hear some of those success stories. And then have you talk a little bit about, have you identified goals for the next 3 to 5 years? And then finally, what resources and support might be helpful to you if you're trying to embark on strategic planning or refresh your strategic planning work. So we're going to give you some breakout group time for this discussion. I'm going to put you into some small groups. You'll see there's a little timer on the screen, and so you'll get that invite in just a second. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of hear some highlights of what we had to say. Jamie also shared those questions in the chat. Thank you so much. We open up those rooms, so you should get an invitation to join in. And I have a couple of folks that I'm going to assign to some additional rooms. Okie doke. So everyone should get that invitation. I'm going to go ahead and pause that recording. All right. I think everyone was successfully pulled back through cyberspace into the main room. Thank you so much for participating in those discussion groups. We have just a few minutes here where I want to see if we could have a few people kind of just share some highlights, right? So definitely not a full report out. We're gonna kind of look at a couple of highlights. So maybe we'll just start with the success stories, like things you're proud of accomplishing. That was the kind of conversation topic number one. Can we get one or two groups just to share a quick example of like, hey, this is something that our collaborative group did, we're really feeling great about? And don't be bashful at this point. It's time to brag.
I'll just give Wade a plug. He was talking about, he's from Teton County, and he was talking about a successful collaboration between motorized and non-motorized to get some snow grooming done. So that is definitely one to be proud of.
That's fantastic. Any other examples out there?
I just can give a shout out to the All Lands partnership on the Boise and Nepean National Forest, where you have a very complex landscape between collaboratives, forest, private, state, lots of things, and then coming in here and actually getting buy-in from those groups, getting investments, building a bigger pie, not threatening or taking things over, but adding capacity and really building that human and political capital to that scenario. So basically everyone, you build a bigger pie. So that was a good example, I think.
Thanks, Sean. Let's move to that second discussion point. Be interested to hear if some groups have identified goals for the next 3 to 5 years. And if you give an example of a goal or two, it's like, hey, this is one that we're working on or that's pressing.
Well, I can at least offer one that came out of our group, and I will reiterate too. So Emily works with the Shoshone-Benewah, and they are actually kind of in the process of identifying goals. They do have a guiding document, but sort of fine-tuning that a little bit. And one of the things she said was that their main goal currently was just supporting the Forest Service and their endeavors on wildfire strategy and protecting communities. And which obviously I think a lot of us are involved when, I guess from the standpoint of the Clearwater Basin Collaborative, I think her take on this sort of, we don't really know what's going on. There's a lot of things in flux. And so kind of having bigger, broader, vaguer goals right now is probably a good way to proceed for the year. And then as we kind of figure out what's going on, how can we support the Forest Service or the other agencies in actually implementing some of the new directives.
Great, thank you, Tara. But anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. Cassidy in our group, I'm gonna call you in here. I thought we had a really really wonderful approach to how she was responding to this question, which was around, she said that she was coordinating several different collaborative groups and thinking about ways to, some of the goals for those groups was to formalize them a little bit more, but also recognizing that not all of the collaboratives really needed to be formalized, or they could operate in a more informal way, and recognizing that there needed to be really an acknowledgement of a value proposition. And I just, I welcome Cassidy for you to provide a little bit more context to that, but I just thought it was a really kind of related point to what Tara was saying, and thought the way that what you were presenting that, Cassidy, made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I'm based in Colorado, and we are a national organization, but the majority of the collaboratives I'm working with now are Colorado based. But like Jamie said, we've been working to formalize, and I use that term loosely. Not all of our collaboratives want to become 501c3s, and that's fine. There's a lot of different ways of doing this, but formalizing in terms of like developing a partnership charter, having that governance structure, developing some financial strategies, communication strategies, and giving everybody kind of a pathway to look forward in compiling all of those documents into a conservation plan or a strategic plan. For one of the collaboratives, we've also been working with Vibrant Planet around our national forest to do some fire mitigation planning or risk reduction planning. But one of the things too is that, these groups are all still in the forming part. And one of the things we've been doing too is bringing in the value proposition to just remind everybody why they're participating, and co-creating that so that we can acknowledge both what the partners are benefiting, but how the partnership is benefiting from their participation. Because we kind of need to remind everybody why we're here and why we're doing this. And also in that, taking the opportunity to assess the, like go, no go. Do we need to continue collaborating? Not all collaboration has to continue on in perpetuity. Is there a timeline? What's the exit strategy? I told one of my groups recently that not making a decision is still making a decision, and we have to acknowledge that. So, let's take that opportunity and think about, what the decision is, and if it's to continue or if it's, not to continue. And that's okay too sometimes.
Thank you,
Thanks for the
Cassidy.
opportunity to share.
I think as we start to get into the phase where we need to wrap up this discussion, there are opportunities to continue these discussions and to think about the support that you have, the networking that you have that can help you with this sort of work. Jamie, of course, I'm going to plug the IFRP Spring Conference. I can do that in a second. Are there things that you want to share from NFF and some of your work that we can push out there at this time to folks?
I think really what we want to just express for all of us here, the panelists who presented today, is like, don't hesitate to reach out at all. We are, I think, would self-describe ourselves as nerds for strategic planning. So I'm happy to continue the conversation. The National Forest Foundation, I'll put the link in the chat. We have a toolbox of resources that does have some examples of strategic plans and some toolkits that you can browse through. I know those are static. We're also, closely working with IFRP to think about maybe a next step for this. And Tawny, your suggestion around like, can we swap strategic plans and give each other feedback? Like really kind of trying to think of a more dynamic way to engage in this conversation. Happy to do round 2 for that. And then, yeah, I will punt it back to you about the spring conference. And I do have a slide that I can share about that.
That's great. Yeah, so there's a couple mentions now in the chat about this with links. So the IFRP Spring Conference is coming up April 22 and 23. It's in Boise. The Deputy Undersecretary of Natural Resources and Environment, Kristen Sleeper, will be there as one of our speakers. We have a number of people on the panels who are just fantastic. So if you enjoyed engaging in this conversation and being a part of that, we really would love to have you continue that in just a few weeks. We get to do that in person and get involved from there. I think one of the other things that I want to point out though too is we definitely had a discussion prompt around like what are the ways that NFF and Jamie and the team there can support you, and feel free to add those ideas into the chat or follow up via email. I think that there's a lot of appetite for the sort of collective support and that we all lean in together to help each other out. And there are some people out there doing fantastic work. Jamie, did you want to go ahead and, yep.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I look forward to connecting with all of you, hopefully in the future. I think these conversations are so important. We recently, just really quickly, I had a fellow position work with us for the last year to really understand what type of resources, how can we best meet the needs of folks like yourself who are working in collaboration. What are those key things that they need? What are the key topics that they need? And like, what's the mechanism for delivery for that? And one of the greatest findings that he found was we really do need these dynamic kind of peer learning, peer-to-peer opportunities, especially in person when you can. And so we're really leaning into these types of opportunities. So if you have any suggestions on themes or topics, please feel free to reach out at any time. And yeah, looking forward to doing this type of thing again. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much for participating. Again, come join us in Boise in a few weeks at the IFRP Spring Conference, and we hope to see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.